following haunting is considered to be one of the most famous ghost stories during World War I, where there were so many credible witnesses that it was even investigated by the British government. Lieutenant Desmond Lucius Studdert P.P. Arthur was born on the 31st of March 1884 at O'Brien's Bridge in County Clare, Ireland, and came from a prominent County Clare family. Arthur was educated at Portora Royal School in Enniskillen in Northern Ireland. From a young age, he had an adventurous spirit, and as he got older, he loved fast cars, where he won a number of prizes in speed trials. In 1908, he became a lieutenant in the Army Motor Reserve. However, Arthur was not only interested in vehicles on the ground, but also took a keen interest in flying, which at that time was in its infancy. His enthusiasm was such that he attended the very first Irish aviation meeting at Leopardstown Racecourse in Dublin on the 29th of August 1910. It was at that meeting that he met a man called Cecil Grace, aged 30, who was a pioneer aviator. It was meeting Cecil Grace that inspired Arthur to become a pilot. Unfortunately, just 4 months after that meeting, Cecil Grace went missing on a flight across the English Channel on the 22nd of December 1910. From that moment, things moved extremely fast for Arthur, where on the 27th of May 1911, he joined the 5th Battalion Royal Munster Fusiliers Special Reserve and was promoted to lieutenant. It was there that Arthur became known for his adventurous nature, modest manner and high spirits. Barely a year later, on the 18th of June 1912, he gained his Royal Aero Club certificate after successfully completing his trials flying a Bristol Prier monoplane at Brooklands Aerodrome in Surrey, UK. On the 17th of April 1913, he joined the No. 2 Squadron of the Royal Flying Corps. The squadron was based at Montrose Airfield in Scotland and was the operational base for the training of pilots for the Royal Flying Corps and was the first of its kind in the UK. Like many training schools, there were frequent crashes, but it was here that pilots were trained for both World War I and World War II. On Tuesday the 27th of May 1913 at around 7:30 a.m, Lieutenant Arthur took to the air in a BE-2-205 biplane, but disaster struck when it collapsed without warning while flying over Montrose while undertaking a routine practice flight from Upper Dysart to Lunnon Bay. While Arthur had started his descent, suddenly, at 2,500 feet, the right wing of the aircraft snapped off and it plunged to the ground, taking the life of the young lieutenant. He was thrown from the aircraft and died instantly, breaking nearly every bone in his body, and was found 160 yards away from the machine. His fellow airmen were surprised by the crash, as they considered him to be a capable pilot. On the 21st of June 1913, the Accidents and Investigation Committee of the Royal Aero Club reported that the accident had been caused by a faulty repair of a broken spar by an unknown mechanic, and that damage to the aircraft had been caused by shoddy workmanship. It is in this location that our ghost story begins. It was a few months after Lieutenant Arthur's tragic accident on the 1st of January 1914 when the squadron moved from Upper Dysart to Broomfield Farm, and a Major Cyril Foggin saw a ghostly figure enter the officers' mess. However, he did not report it, firm that his reputation would be damaged and that he could be demoted or worse, be forced out of the services. But he was not the only person to witness ghostly apparitions, as there were further sightings by other officers and flight instructors. It appeared that all of the sightings were coming from the old mess of the No. 2 Flying Squadron. The sightings had become so frequent that the area became known as the Irish Apparition or the Montrose Ghost. Judging by the many descriptions given of the ghost, there appeared to be no doubt that they were seeing Lieutenant Arthur's apparition. His entity had become so common that guards were starting to desert their posts and pilots were so spooked that they were requesting transfers out of Montrose. Other men began reporting mysterious footsteps and phantom plane noises. One pilot claimed he saw a fellow soldier in flight gear walk to the door of their mess hall, only to disappear without entering, while a flight instructor said he woke up in the middle of the night and saw a pilot sitting in a chair by his bed. Another man, who had known Arthur, said that Arthur appeared to his room and tried to speak to him, but that the entity couldn't make any sound. The stories became so infamous that supposedly a German pilot who was shot down and captured behind Allied lines asked what the latest news on the ghost was. Because of these sightings, superstitious pilots started thinking there was something keeping Arthur from moving on. A close friend of Lieutenant Arthur was C.C. Gray, who claimed that his appearance was linked to the official investigation into the crash. During World War I, another investigative report was published at the end of 1916 that totally exonerated Lieutenant Arthur and restored his reputation, finding that the crash was due to a damaged wing. This was the original unofficial diagnosis. After the findings, Arthur made another appearance on the 17th of January 1917, which many believed would be his last haunting, that his spirit could at last move on, knowing that it had been vindicated. However, that was not to be, when he made another appearance 23 years later in 1940 when Britain was involved in World War II. A Hurricane pilot claimed that he was distracted by a mysterious World War I biplane while searching for a German Heinkel bomber. Whether this plane was an omen in some way is not known, or maybe Lieutenant Arthur felt that making an appearance would help the pilot's morale. In 1942, a flight lieutenant stationed at Montrose crashed into the runway not long after takeoff and lost his life immediately. Apparently, a week before the crash, he'd been seen quarrelling with a mechanic who had been working on his plane. The mechanic then became the subject of an inquiry in the belief he may have tampered with the plane, causing it to crash. But no evidence was found, although it was mentioned that shortly after the crash there were reports of a ghost appearing at the airfield wearing a flying suit and goggles. In a classic ghostly scene, the pilot was described as walking along the flight line, emerging from a fog. Did Lieutenant Arthur make an appearance to guide the deceased pilot? By 1949, Montrose was now a permanent training station with a constant stream of new recruits who were all duly warned about the ghost. Lieutenant Arthur never failed to disappoint, in that there were dozens of sightings of an officer in a white flight suit with a hat and goggles. The sightings continued until the airfield closed in the 1950s. Then, on the 27th of May 1963, Sir Peter Masefield was flying his Chipmunk monoplane close to the old Montrose Air Base when he spotted an old BE-2 biplane. He described the pilot as wearing a leather flying helmet with goggles and a flying scarf, not in any way believing he was seeing an apparition. He watched in shock as the plane crashed. Masefield then landed his plane expecting to find the wreckage, but found no sign of a plane or its wreckage. Lieutenant Arthur's fatal air crash was one of the first to occur in the Royal Flying Corps and the first at Montrose. He was buried in Sleepy Hillock Cemetery, Montrose. Lieutenant Arthur was honoured with a wreath-laying ceremony on the 100th anniversary of his deadly accident. Whether that was the last people would see of his ghost is another thing altogether.